Welcome to a fascinating journey through one of the most complex and influential periods in human history, the Middle Ages, an era that spans roughly the 5th to the 15th century, a millennium of profound transformation. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you like these videos and leave a like. Now let's start. In ancient times, not all crowns were made of gold. Some were made of silence and tears. In times when the altar sealed fate, there were oaths that cost more than the soul. Inside houses filled with crosses and prayers, cries stifled by divine morality resounded. But the scariest thing? All this was considered normal. The mission as a commandment, the house under the cross. The family structure in the Middle Ages was more rigid than stone walls. Inspired by biblical passages and fiery sermons, the ideal family model was based on obedience, of the wife to the husband, of the children to the father, and of all to God. The husband was seen as the spiritual head of the home, responsible for correcting mistakes, including physical punishment if necessary. This reasoning was based on a literal reading of sacred texts such as Paul's epistle to the Ephesians, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord." For many, it was not a metaphor, but a directive of conduct. From the pulpits, priests reinforced the idea that an obedient wife saved her soul, while a disobedient one was a risk to the entire house. Correction, even violent, was seen as an act of love to save her from herself. Thus, a perverse cycle was created. Women were educated to accept aggression as spiritual purification, and husbands were authorized to educate by force. Domestic morality was enforced in Sunday sermons, confessions, even folk songs. The female voice was drowned out by the authority of the good husband, and any defiance was interpreted as rebellion against the divine order. In this way, the medieval house, idealized as a temple of harmony, often hid realities of fear, submission, and pain. And the cruelest? With the blessing of the altar, laws and canons, when the staff became doctrine. To understand veiled permissiveness, we must open the most influential manuscript of canon law, the Decretum Gratiani, compiled in the 11th century. Among his glosses, a cold comment stated that the husband could correct his wife with blows as long as they were moderate, a concept as flexible as the stick that illustrated it. Later jurists, such as John of Fribourg, repeated the formula. The man was the shepherd of the house, the woman a sheep susceptible to being beaten. Breaking this logic was seen as rebellion against God, since male authority reflected the cosmic order. The Lord rules the sky, the king rules the kingdom, the husband rules the home. In the sermons, wives were urged to be patient in the face of pious rebukes. Husbands were only asked not to exceed the reasonable measure. The problem? No one knew where that line began, much less where it ended. In the ecclesiastical courts of France and England, only cases of manifest saevitia, extreme violence, gave the right to separation. And even then, the woman had to present bruises, witnesses, and repeated evidence. Otherwise, the advice was simple: Christian patience. This ambiguity generated centuries of abuses legitimized by the theology of submission. Understanding the decretum is to reveal the legal shield that transformed houses into rings. And the most disturbing thing, faith itself fueled the cycle. Stories written with blood and iron. we leave the manuscripts and enter the muddy streets where the theory came to life. In the records of the Episcopal Court of Chartres, now kept by researchers at Brigham Young University, we find the case of Margarita, a peasant woman who appeared before the judge covered in bruises. She reported her husband Guglielmo for weekly assaults, burning with embers and threats of drowning in the winter. The court recognized Seavitia as manifest and granted the separation, but as part of the verdict, they asked her to continue praying for him. Justice. In another source, studied by researcher Rebecca Mason, we find Anne of York in the north of England. She was sent home after the bishop judged that the swelling on her face was no more than moderate. Since no bones were broken, her husband received only a warning. Do not overdo it again. Not even the nobility escaped. In Milan, the aristocrat Elena Visconti recorded that the Count, her husband, inflicted 11 blows on her with a studded belt. The case reached Rome, but the papal consultants shelved the trial to avoid public scandal. The pattern repeated itself. The word moderation was shaped by the name of the attacker, the silence of the victim, and the fear of dishonor. Between acquittals and light fines, the abuses continued. Yet some women raised their voices, sought refuge in confraternities, relied on neighbors, or simply fled. In these silent acts, history recorded more than pain. It recorded courage, voices that broke the silence, women's resistance. Despite the weight of tradition and the strength of ecclesiastical authority, some women found ways to resist. In times when even praying out loud could be interpreted as an affront, raising one's voice was a heroic act. In 14th century France, records show women seeking refuge in religious brotherhoods. These brotherhoods offered more than prayers. They were social shields, offering shelter, legal support, and sometimes even interventions with bishops. In medieval England, neighbors and relatives did not always turn their backs. There are documented cases where entire communities protected threatened women, confronting the aggressor with the collective force of popular justice. Some achieved something even rarer: legal recognition. They went to the ecclesiastical courts with marks on their bodies and witnesses in hand, obtaining legal separation, an achievement almost unbelievable in the general panorama. More than rebellion, these actions demonstrated survival instinct. They wrote, even without ink, another type of story, that of the woman who refused the imposed destiny. Their voices, though silenced then, ring loudly today. They are a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there were those who had the courage to light a candle. We have come to the end of another journey into the dark background of our history. The Middle Ages may be over, but certain behaviors persist. No tradition, doctrine, or authority justifies silence in the face of another's pain. Violence against women is not part of culture. It is a crime, and it must be fought every day. If you suffer or know someone in a situation of violence, seek help, report it. Because love is not measured by fear or obedience, but by respect and dignity. Having reached the end of this journey into the dark sides of history, we cannot help but pause for a moment to reflect. For centuries, religious authority has shaped not only faith, but also the most intimate structures of daily life: the family, marriage, the role of women. And too often, in the name of spirituality and divine order, human suffering has been justified. Domestic violence, especially against women, was not only tolerated, it was normalized, blessed, even prescribed. Literal interpretations of sacred texts, theological justifications, and legal complicity shaped a world in which love could coincide with punishment, and obedience was mistaken for salvation. In that world, shouting was heresy, defending oneself was rebellion, and surviving was already an act of heroism. But even in the darkest centuries, some voices have risen. Women who have resisted, who have sought refuge, asked for help, reported, or simply chosen not to give in. Often ignored by official history, these women are today living testimony of courage and dignity. They are the ones who have lit, even in the midst of darkness, small flames of hope and change. Today, we have the duty to collect that legacy. Because, although history has moved on, certain mentalities persist. Even today, there exist cultures of silence, doctrines that blame the victim, and social structures that protect the aggressor. Even today, there are those who try to justify the unjustifiable in the name of tradition, faith, or moral control. But the time for justifications is over. Violence is never love. Obedience is never respect. Silence today can no longer be a virtue. We need awareness, education, empathy. We need to tell these stories, hard, uncomfortable, but true, so that no one can say, "I didn't know." We need each of us in our daily lives to become an active part of a profound cultural change, because every person deserves to live free from fear. Because human dignity has no time, no era, no religion. It is a right, always. That's all for today. And what do you think of this story? Let me know in the comments. Your opinion is fundamental. You help me support the channel. See you next time. Bye.